We are live. We are live. We live. We live. Right. I'm going to go over to youtube.com/Max Kaiser TV. And I'm assuming you're also watching this here, because you have subscribed. But make sure everybody else subscribes because this is where you get the microdose. Today we are microdosing Stacy's hair. Everybody has been talking about my hair, Max.
Yeah, that's an during lockdown. I think that's the kind of the topic of the lockdown. It's captured the brass ring for lockdown.
You see, I especially cut my bangs, or my fringe, as my British viewers might call them.
Oh yeah, yep, looking good.
Max doesn't like to have to notice these things, the difference between a woman's haircut. Like sometimes we cut our fringe, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we cut our bangs, sometimes we don't. Right now they're cut. I see the people joining us. We also started a new Facebook page, facebook.com/Orange Pill Podcast, Max. What do you think of that?
It's good. It's the spreading, the footprint, the orange pill phenomenon is spreading all over. So that's great. I'm all for it.
Everybody is saying they love my hair. Woohoo! I like that.
I feel at a disadvantage because, being a guy, the equivalent for a guy would be talking about his car, right? And I don't have a car. I don't even have a driver's license. So I feel at a disadvantage because you get to talk about your hair and I don't have a car. So it's very lopsided, but that's too bad.
I'm not so sure about that because, George Clooney has been in the press all week long because he used a Flowbee on his hair, he said, in some interview. And Flowbee was flying. It's out of stock now. And he had to then go back on television to prove that, in fact, he says he never gets haircuts. He just does his own. He uses a Flowbee, whatever that is. And then he had to prove that he actually knows how to use a Flowbee and that he wasn't lying. So George Clooney's hair was in the news this week.
Yeah, but he's known primarily for his cars.
No, he's not. You're thinking of Jay Leno. I think you're thinking of Jay Leno. Right. Somebody said...
I'll make a note of that. I don't know what a Flowbee is.
You see, I saw it in Max's eyes that he was curious about what this Flowbee was. And anything that could save you $20-$30 a pop, to go in and get your hair cut. Apparently this is what George Clooney has been doing. Somebody tweeted, Turk Fontaine, who is on Twitter at @LookCoconuts. He said, if you charted the rise in Bitcoin and the rise in interest in Stacy's hair, and she being the queen of charts, probably has, I think you would find almost identical lines. So apparently the rise in the price of Bitcoin is correlated to the interest in Stacy's hair. If you did Google Trend search, you would find that, mentions of Stacy's hair are just going up parabolic in the same sort of pattern as Bitcoin.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we've been able to monetize Stacy's hair for 11 years. It's worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Here's my margarita. Sats Margs and Orange Pill right here. Max has his iced coffee. Once he finishes that, that's when the rants start.
Who knows when the rants start? It's hard to say. It's got to be well motivated. And, I'm just getting up to speed right now. What's happening?
Right. So let's talk about what's in the news, okay? So we have MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor, we have Ray Dalio, and we have JP Morgan, all in the Bitcoin news this week. I am going to start quickly with Ray Dalio because he didn't ask me anything in AMA this week. And of course, everybody asked him about Bitcoin. And he said that now he's moved to the position whereby he says, yes, there is a place for Bitcoin in investors' portfolios. What do you think of that, Max?
Well, as in my interview with Crypto Potato not too long ago, I said that Ray Dalio is a Bitcoiner in waiting. That once he did the homework and took a serious look at it, he would start to gravitate toward it. And now you see he's inching into the Bitcoin circle. and I'm sure he'll start buying it, because once you start to study it, it really starts to make sense for people who manage money for a living. And this is, again, the impact of Paul Tudor Jones earlier in the year. He kind of started the firing gun he made it safe for professional money managers to look at Bitcoin, to buy Bitcoin. So Ray Dalio, I'm sure, will have a big position. He's already into the gold business, gold bug. So it's easy for him to make the move over to Bitcoin.
Here we are. Here we are. I'm going to post this in our Telegram group. I know you like me, narrating to you what I'm actually doing as well. Speaking of gold, I'll jump ahead of the Michael Saylor MicroStrategy story and skip to JP Morgan, because JP Morgan is out with a new report about the flow of funds that they're seeing. And what do they note? They say, well, there is definite flow from gold ETFs to Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So they say in their report, the flow trajectory for Grayscale Bitcoin Trust steepened in recent weeks. This is the stock symbol GBTC. I guess they have about 550,000 Bitcoin. And JP Morgan notes that what makes this flow trajectory even more impressive is its contrast with the equivalent flow trajectory for gold ETFs, which overall saw modest outflows since mid-October. What do you think of this, Max?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, this is really something that's been talked about. Barry Silbert, of course, ran that series of ads last year, Drop Gold. And the gold bugs were outraged. And how could you possibly equate the two? And no one's ever going to drop gold and buy Bitcoin. Well, a year later, this is exactly what's happening. So this is a report based on capital flows. And capital flows are to define the reality of the market, really. I mean, a lot of people have different opinions about things, but capital flows where it's going to go based on where it gets the highest return. And right now it's flowing into Bitcoin and it's flowing out of gold. And, gold is just too centralized. And the price, it hasn't really had fair price discovery in 20 years, really. It's the price of gold doesn't reflect supply and demand whatsoever. It hasn't for years and years. So that's a huge problem. And when JP Morgan or others are caught manipulating the price of gold, they get slapped with a bit of a fine. But but they pay for the fine by continuing to manipulate gold. So it's a no-lose situation for them. And the price is going to all for gold is always going to have this headwind. It's always going to have trouble making advances because there are too many vested interests that don't want to see it advance. Meanwhile, Bitcoin has really a more true price discovery, and it is more supply and demand, reflects supply and demand. So if you're a professional money manager and you fear inflation, you're going to go to Bitcoin.
Right, because gold is so centralized. Most of it is owned by central banks. But most importantly, the reason why it's owned by central banks is because it's just so heavy and so difficult to transport. And as it was used as a reserve currency up until 1971. So it was safer and easier to just store it all at the New York Fed in New York, or, the Bank of England and Threadneedle Street or places like that. And then, use a ledger essentially to say, okay, I'll trust that you have that bar of gold there, and we're going to mark it on this ledger that you're holding it there. So, they have a lot of this gold, and they use their ledger to lend it out theoretically to, say, JP Morgan or, any of the other big banks. And then they lend that out and create derivatives and ETFs on top of it. So nobody knows exactly how many of those bars of gold are already allocated somewhere else. And they also, a lot of those derivative, the exchange ETFs, and how gold trades is it usually settles in dollars. So because nobody wants the hassle of the physical delivery, right?
That's one of the problems of gold. It's cash delivery, not physical delivery. And nobody wants to take physical delivery, even though it would be easy to make a lot of money by demanding physical delivery on the COMEX. But nobody has stood up to break the COMEX like that. Whereas Michael Saylor has stood up and he's going to break the Fed like George Soros broke the Bank of England back in 1992. So that's going to be interesting for the next 6 months.
What's your T-shirt say?
I don't know. What I can't read it.
Get Off Zero.
All right.
It's Michael Saylor with his micro beam eyes and his crown. He's the king. He's the laser king. So yeah, let me see what the comments are saying. Stacy's hair coin, Paris in the house. Hi, Rico Liberty Report. There's some jerk. Maybe I could ban them. Let's see. Oh no, I don't have the Max Kaiser TV one. I'm on Stacy Herbert. But there's some jerks with dissing Bitcoin and just trying to get attention. What a cool t-shirt, Max. Get Off Zero. My BTC holdings are up. Ah ha ha. Hey, Andy Mayer. He's doing some exclamation points. Regards from Chile. Free New York City. Hey, I read that there's a bunch of rats taking over while the people have fled. And, speaking of kings, King Rat, they've taken over New York City. They are the king of the New York jungle. And they're attacking employees at Chipotle or something.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah, huge rats. They've been biting employees. The restaurant is shut down, and they're just trying to clean it up, and the rats are attacking them.
I have to say, now that we've had him on the show, we could mention Sean Lennon. One time we were in Manhattan, and in summer, walking back from dinner at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and going through Soho. And in Soho, and this is just outside of Chinatown. So Chinatown and Soho have all those restaurants. So after all the restaurants close at midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, they put all their garbage outside, their trash for collection. And the rats are everywhere. I remember Max and I were like scared, holding each other's arm, by the arm, going, ah. Sean was totally relaxed about it. He's like, oh, those are out every night.
Yeah. Yeah, no, big rats in Soho. And you just see the streets kind of alive and moving, in unexpected ways. And it's not pleasant, really. No, I didn't like it.
No, it's not just like 1 or 2 that you see. It's hundreds everywhere, all over. And they're so relaxed. They just look at you and like, get away from my food. Just leave me alone, okay?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I won't eat you. I won't attack you.
It's more than just Pizza Rat. It's they've got a whole new generation.
Yeah, because Pizza Rat, that's kind of like propaganda in a way, because that was just a mouse, right? Like the rats are like this big. You see them like, at least the ones in Soho and Chinatown. They're just like, they are the king of the king rats of all of New York City, because they get all the food and they are enormous.
Yeah, they're getting really big. So apparently it's a huge crisis right now in the Upper West Side, and different neighborhoods is impacted differently. And the Upper West Side is looking terrible. Soho is rat infested, and it's it's a problem that I think is not going to go away anytime soon.
Right. I guess another problem not going away anytime soon are the comments in here, but we're going to talk about this later. But people keep on asking if we're going to talk about the Galactic Federation. And we will talk about the Galactic Federation on the full dose, when you get your full dose of Orange Pill on Sunday. And we're also talk about it on Kaiser Report. The microdose, we're here to talk about my hair. And, the Bitcoin news happening now, whereas the full dose, once you have your microdose on Wednesday, it's prepping you for the full dose on Sunday, because, you need to have a little bit first before you get this big chunk of mind-blowing content, right?
Yeah. It's a sorbet before the main meal. It's a amuse-bouche.
Amuse-bouche, right. And so we're just talking about the Bitcoin news now. We're going to talk about the Galactic Federation. It is an amusing story, and I have a lot to say about it. But I have some good metaphors and analogies derived from it that we want to talk about on the next full dose of Orange Pill. And remember to, I have to say this, like this freaking, live stream here. Hit the like button. I'm not going to move until I see it go up. Hit it. Hit it. Hit it, hit it, hit it, hit it, smash it, as they say.
Smash the like button.
Smash the like button. And then follow us on Facebook.com/Orange Pill Podcast. And the reason why I say that, because I know everybody's going to go, I don't have Facebook. I don't have Facebook. Okay. I don't need to know that. All I need to know is that you're going to follow us there because, there's an imposter account over at Instagram, which is also owned by Facebook. So it's an imposter Orange Pill podcast. And I have to say, they actually do a good job. I mean, their graphics, they post all this interesting content from our shows. But they're obviously, I'm assuming, using it as not a fan account because it doesn't say that, but it's as a, scam account. They might be just scamming people. I don't know. Like, you don't know who they're DMing or whatever. Nevertheless, because Facebook owns them, we need to get our like and follower numbers up on the Facebook thing to then take control back of the Instagram using the same URL. So it's facebook.com/Orange Pill Podcast. Go there, help your fellow orange pilled out.
Yeah. Do it today.
Do it today. Do it now. Smash from Austria. See, oh my God, it's just like jumped so much. The likes jump. Ask and ye shall receive.
It's interactive universe. The universe is a cornucopia of bountiful wonderfulness. You just need to ask. Ask and ye shall receive. It's all there in the biblical codes.
Did you ever watch Winky Dink and You?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I'm the one who told you about Winky Dink.
Yeah, I know, but I want to know, did you ever watch it? Because, I had never seen it. So when Max and I were growing up, the thing about I'd say, basically pre-1980s when all the cable channels came around and then all those children's cable television came around, like a lot of the content we watched as children, targeting children, was just like there was no media entertainment complex around children's television, right? And marketing towards children. So you had a lot of old stuff that used to be shown from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So we were exposed to things like Leave It to Beaver, for example, which was not, made in the 70s. But that's what I, as a child, was watching because it was just available and they just put it on Sunday television. So Winky Dink and You was actually like mostly from the 50s, but you watched it. It was like interactive television.
Yeah, well, for children's entertainment, they had Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is before Sesame Street, specific type of children's programming from National Public Radio or the public access television created wholesome children's entertainment. You had cartoons. So Winky Dink was, what year was Winky Dink made? It may have been in the late 50s. So you would put some plastic on the TV screen, and Winky Dink would get into trouble. Like he needed to draw a bridge for Winky Dink. And so you're putting your eyeballs right on the TV and you're drawing a bridge for Winky Dink, until they figured out that that's probably not really healthy for kids to be staring right into the TV like that. So they took it off the air. And but I just remember it. The theme song, of course, Winky Dink and You, Winky Dink and me, always have a lot of fun together. Ha! Winky Dink and You, Winky Dink and me, always getting it on Saturday morning, loving like we do with the cartoons and the cereals. What? Say
right.
What? Huh? What?
The originals aired from 1953 to 1957.
Okay, late 50s, right. Late 50s, and then the repeats for a while.
Yeah, you were still seeing them in the 60s. So,
The big program for me in the 60s was Captain Kangaroo. Yes. So Captain Kangaroo I watched every morning. And I remember Bunny Rabbit vividly. And he had that trick where he'd call the captain over, and then a whole ceiling full of ping pong balls would fall down on his head. And I'd be like, that fucking Bunny Rabbit's got the captain's number. He fools him every time. Grandfather Clock, that sleeping clock. He was cool.
Well, but the thing that made me think of these corny TV shows, the children's television shows, was like that in our Telegram group, there were several hours, maybe the whole night while we were sleeping, of people just like talking about communism. And it just seems so like corny, like from like a different era that, there's only, 3 communist countries left, right? Theoretically communist: Cuba, Vietnam, and China. And China and Vietnam are not communist, right? There's nothing communist about those countries. They're hyper-capitalist. They have a communist party, a single party that politically rules the country, but their economies are capitalist. So when people were talking about this, like communism in the Telegram group, it was like reading something, like going back in time. Like, imagine if this foreign board could have existed back in the 60s when, some of the civil rights movement and flower power and various ideas were starting to pop up, and considering possibly communism or other things, and that people didn't realize just like how much of a disaster communism was, and it hadn't yet collapsed globally, and there was a significant presence globally in terms of the Soviet empire. But now it's just like looking back at Winky Dink and you, and trying to figure out what these people are even thinking about.
Yeah, I must have missed that one.
Yeah, you did.
But thinking about Winky Dink and all these cartoons got me thinking of Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse, because it had the best theme music of any cartoon. Dun 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 bum 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 dun 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 da da bam 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 bam. Right, and I think the New York Dolls actually covered the Courageous Cat theme music.
Oh, that would make sense.
When
They're
they
so cool.
were, starting out, the first punk band in New York City. They were influenced by the Saturday morning cartoons, obviously. David, forget his last name now.
Right. Let me look it up for you. New York Dolls.
Yeah, David.
What's his name? Like, we're just
David,
like, we're just David Johansen.
Yeah, David Johansen. Yeah.
And guitarist Johnny Thunders and bassist Arthur Kane.
Yeah, the New York Dolls. Yeah. So communism. Why are people talking about communism? I don't know. It's I guess what they really want to talk about is Marxism. I guess I don't know. How did communism even come up in the conversation?
Well, obviously, like, there is a bizarre situation whereby Kai's Report has become a huge, massive hit in Cuba.
Oh.
So we have all these Cubans in our Telegram group, and Cuba is like a relic from the past and from our childhood days. Like, it's like reruns of Winky Dink and You, right? I mean, it is something from a different era, frozen in time.
Yeah, even they have the cars from the
cars.
1950s, right? So they're kind of like frozen in time, right?
Yeah. So that there was a whole conversation that started. A few of the people got banned. They were trolls and stuff. But it was an interesting conversation. I mean, the sanctions and restrictions on Cuba have led to really interesting things, like the fact that they're kind of a pharmaceutical powerhouse. They've had to invent their own pharmaceuticals because they've been their sanctions prevent them from importing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So they've innovated a lot in that sort of respect. They haven't obviously innovated in terms of cars, other than the fact that they managed to keep all those cars on the road all these decades.
But the idea is that it's communist.
Yeah. It's still, I guess it's less communist now, right? I mean, they've gone the way of Vietnam and China. They're encouraging all sorts of tourism and trying to rake in the hard cash and bring in money. I don't know how if the economy still runs like those, everybody gets subsidized food parcels and stuff like that. I don't know if that still exists, like the old Soviet system, but that's like the last holdout. That's what I'm saying. Is just like accidentally tuning into somewhere, on how the US, television has like 300, 400 channels, and you happen upon one that's just showing stuff from the 60s. Like, it just seems like really old fashioned, and it did overtake the conversation about communism was just like so bizarre. I couldn't make heads or tails of it.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, so the Cubans, of course, are watching Kaiser Report and loving it. It's broadcast into Cuba, and we have a huge fan base there.
They love Bitcoin. They love Bitcoin, and that's the cool thing. We've delivered more liberty to the Cuban people by liberating their minds from fiat than any of the interventions, the 185 attempts on Castro's life, like all the stuff we've done. Like, none of it has liberated the people more than what Kai's Report has done. That's my opinion. I have a high opinion of myself and my hair and all that stuff.
Well, the Bitcoin is a methodology for sovereign individuality, and that would go against, let's say, a communist doctrine, right? Because they would talk about the collective, right? So any country that's skewed toward communism is talking about the collective, and individual wealth, individual property, individual sovereignty would be at odds with that government scheme. So we know that historically, no communist um, political government scheme has worked, right? And so you know why? Because people because the collective always means that you have a centralized governing authority who, without fail, becomes corrupt. Whereas the market at least has the possibility of being actual price discovery and kind of evolving away from corruption. In the US, it's totally corrupt because the central bank that's making is a centralized authority that controls the price of money. So you control the entire economy. So in a lot of ways, the U.S. economy is communist in that sense. And you've got a Politburo in the Federal Reserve Bank, and they control and centralize the price of money through their federal open market committee. And they do so that would make any Politburo apparatchik in the Soviet Union blush. It's such a corrupt system in America. And the results are with us. We have a country that's in severe dysfunction. So we have that all in common with our Cuban friends. We want individual sovereignty. So do the Cubans want individual sovereignty. They have a system of government that is, to some extent, uh, not currying favor with the population. Same thing in the United States. The United States has a huge number of people that are not at all happy with the way things are happening. And that's true all over the world. We call it the global insurrection against banker occupation. Every single country is in revolt against the banker occupation. And it comes in different shapes and flavors in different countries, whether it's Cuban or America. But I think America has a lot more in common with Cuba today than probably at any time in the last 60 years.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, because you were talking about, okay, market economies are better, but of course, as we started the show, we were talking about how there's no price discovery in gold allowed, because why? The central banks own it, the governments own it, that there's a cartel around that they
Mm.
get to control the price. But remember, both with Iran and Cuba, who are the two most sanctioned countries by the U.S., think about what they were before they had these governments that we now hate, right? Of course, the U.S. government overthrew Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran because we didn't want them. What was he doing? He wanted to take the national oil, their oil wealth, back from British Petroleum. So he was overthrown, and the Shah installed, and he was a horrible, brutal man, right? And a brutal way of dealing with his problems. The same with Cuba is, remember, we had Batista was in there and backed by the US, and he was a dictator from 52 to 58, 59. And a lot of the conspiracy theories around JFK involve Cuba, because what he said, as he pointed out in 1959, I guess he said, quote, "At the beginning of 1959, United States companies owned about 40% of the Cuban sugar lands, almost all of the cattle ranches, 90% of the mines and mineral concessions, 80% of the utilities, practically all of the oil industry, and supplied 2/3 of Cuba's imports." So the U.S. also controlled 25% of its bank deposits, which was $1 billion in total at the time. So in the book on becoming Cuban, historian Louis Perez said, daily life had developed into a relentless degradation with the complicity of political leaders and public officials who operated at the behest of American interests. So, JFK himself said this in speeches, that this was a problem, and why the Cubans had, allowed Fidel Castro to do this, because they were living in a degraded situation under JFK also pointed out that Batista killed 20,000 people. Like he just murdered dissidents.
Mm-hmm.
So, there was no golden era. Batista obviously also, as we know, was like, let Meyer Lansky run the whole island. Like it was a total mafia joint. So, when everybody talks about, oh, the evils of communism, they forget to mention, well, like maybe that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't intervened with this dictator in order to steal all their assets, right? Like they gave that wasn't capitalism. Like the fact that the US owned 90% of their mines or 80% of their productive land. Like what is that? That's not capitalism.
No, it's a colony.
Yeah, exactly.
So Cuba was a colony of the U.S., and this was an anti-colonial revolt, which took the shape of a communist revolt. But it was going to happen one way or another if the people wanted to escape the colonial ravages of the colonial overlords. And so the fact that Castro was able to stage a successful revolution right in America's backyard, was obviously got a lot of people in the United States angry. And unlike Haiti, Haiti was also had a revolt, but it was put down by the colonial overlords in the United States and elsewhere, and the country is a total mess. And that could have been Cuba as well, So the U.S.'s imperial ambitions, going on for more than 100 years. Whenever I talk like this, I find myself parsing my phrases as Noam Chomsky would. I can hear Noam Chomsky talking. The way he speaks, his cadence and the way he his phraseology of Noam Chomsky is very distinct. And whenever you talk about Cuba and communism in America, you end up the inner Noam Chomsky comes out, and then I'm rifling through and I'm thinking, what did he say in this book and that book? But nevertheless, we are Cuban fans are big. They get the show because individual sovereignty is a common theme throughout the world right now. And Bitcoin is the way to achieve individual sovereignty against all occupying. The banking occupation, it's in America. America was spared the occupation for decades until really recently. Obviously, in 2008, it all became obvious. The facade fell. The mask was ripped off. And people in America could see that we are in the horrible occupation of these bankers. And we had, of course, Occupy Wall Street, but we also had many others protests around the country, and this is all tied to this one theme of we don't want to be occupied by these bankers anymore. And it's coming to a head, and things are getting less and less, coherent, and we slip into a kind of a chaotic state.
Right, and that's the thing is if it's global insurrection against banker occupation, unlike the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70 or early 70s, as we're discussing here, the difference between then and now is that back then, when Cuba went communist, for example, is because they're a tiny, tiny little island, just like a few hundred yards, essentially, off the coast of Florida. So they're in America's backyard, and there was no way they could do that. They could have that revolution and overthrow all these American financiers in Cuba without the Soviet Union, right? They had to go to somebody as big as the American empire. So they had to go there. They had to form an alliance with the Soviet Union and thus become communist, like a Soviet communist sort of system. Whereas today, you don't need to have these allies. You don't need to go to any nation state to say, hey, can you help me take on the occupation of my banking system, our monetary system? You just need to buy a few Satoshis and join Orange Pill Podcast Group and follow us on facebook.com/Orange Pill Podcast.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyone can join the revolution when they own some Satoshis. They're part of the revolution, and it's the only revolution really that's peaceful in this and 100% effective.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a guarantee to succeed. It's peaceful, and those two things usually don't go together. Usually revolutions are always met with a lot of violence, but here this is a non-violent revolution against the banker occupation that has a 100% success guarantee.
Right. And also from the last episode of the Full Dose of Orange Pill podcast, I want to mention that Max, you had said the Sorcerer's Stone
Right.
instead of the Philosopher's Stone, which going back to childhood stuff, of course, Max was a magician back then and hung out at magic shops and performed magic tricks and things like that.
It's funny because during the interview with Zeus, I said, this sounds a lot like the Philosopher's Stone. And I looked it up on Wikipedia to make sure I knew that this was, in fact, the Philosopher's Stone. And then in the show, I said Sorcerer's Stone. I think it's because I think Sorcerer's Stone's an improvement. And I think they should revise Wikipedia and call the article the Sorcerer's Stone. I think it's better.
Well, I guess it's because, those philosophers, they were studying things like what is truth, who are we, what is value. They were trying to understand simple organizing concepts of how human societies were organized. So they set out a lot of their mission. They set out as you pointed out, with alchemy. They were trying to turn these base metals into gold.
Right.
And so it captivated the most amazing minds for the next 1,000 years. Like, Newton also, he spent a lot of his time trying to come up with turn base metals into gold.
He was considered the last alchemist. Right. And Bitcoin does it, it succeeds. It turns electricity into gold. Right. So the Philosopher's Stone has been realized in 2009 when the Genesis block hatched. That was the achievement, that it took 2,700 years to get to that moment. But that's been the goal for 2,700 years, and it was achieved at that moment. And you turned electricity into gold.
That's interesting, because that's kind of like a philosophical or psychological thing. Is they always say, like, you become what you hate, or if you try too hard to get something, if you try to find love and you're desperate for it, like you'll never find it. But if you just be yourself and be comfortable with yourself and just not just be open to finding love or things like this, then it happens to you. But maybe once we all gave up, and you're saying that Isaac Newton was the last alchemist, like once we gave up, only then could this alchemy happen.
Yeah. I mean, well, Henry Ford put out a paper talking about money based on electricity. Buckminster Fuller talked about doing something similar. The cypherpunks are trying to solve the double spend problem. So it's been a thread throughout history, really. Certainly with the beginning of empirical sciences and the transition from alchemy to empirical science, it took on a different shape, a different form. And then with the beginning of electrical engineering, and the microchip era and things like that, then it led to another step in the evolution. And then finally, this inner quest that we had. Philosophy started with this inner quest, who are we? Why are we here? So that was 2,700 years ago. Now Bitcoin solves all these answers. So it happened. It turns electricity into gold. It also answers all the questions. And if you have any questions, Bitcoin is the answer. And a lot of people are realizing that. Like Ray Dalio, he has a question. How do I stop losing so much money in my fund this year? Because he's down horribly. And when he asked himself that question honestly, then the answer came to him, Bitcoin. And other people will ask themselves other questions like, why am I lacking any kind of moral rectitude in my life? And the answer is Bitcoin. So it works for everybody simultaneously in all directions.
And there was another thing that we said on the last episode, the full dose, which is transmogrification.
Transubstantiation.
But I did look up transmogrification, and it's interesting because the thesaurus.com says that they're synonyms, transmogrification and transubstantiation.
Yeah.
But obviously the Catholic Church.
Yeah, the church uses transubstantiation.
But transmogrification is like, you did also mention turning a cucumber into a pickle. You mentioned that in your interview. That's transmogrification.
Right.
And it's also used as in the word, like they will say that there was a transmogrification of pagan symbols into Christian ones. So like the Egyptian sun discs became the halos of,
Again, alchemy, turning something into something else.
yes. And God eating was a pagan ritual.
Right. So transubstantiation refers to the Catholic Church, and one of the congresses of the Vatican from the Middle Ages was that to decide that the Eucharist was in fact the transmogrification of the wafer and the wine to the bone and blood of Christ, and that they were in fact not symbolic, but
Yeah.
they were the actual thing through the process of transmogrification. And so again, getting back to Bitcoin, the transmogrification of electricity into gold, and this is the new Eucharist. And so when you take a Satoshi, you are accepting the spirit of Satoshi when you are entering the Bitcoin realm.
I think so. I think that's what, when I say you just need a Satoshi of your own, and it alters your mind. It transmogrifies in your mind. Like it becomes something else. You think in different ways. And it's like taking that wafer.
Yeah, it's the Eucharist of absolute divine conjunction or conjoining or merging. You become one with the all powerful through Bitcoin, through the Eucharist of Bitcoin.
You become one with the protocol.
Right. So in the Eucharist, you swallow the bone and blood of Christ. It's a very, it's a very religious act. So with Bitcoin, you're effectively swallowing the protocol of Satoshi. You're becoming one with that divineness of it.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Right. Speaking of the divineness of it, the words in the beginning was the word.
Yes, that's right. It was in the beginning.
And the word itself was God, right? So
that's right.
This was an interesting tweet from Forbes Crypto. They'll change it to Forbes Bitcoin one day. But can you sum up crypto's 2020 in 3 words? The response I'm looking at that is interesting comes from a sitting congressman from Ohio, Warren Davidson. And he responded to Forbes Crypto and said, "Short the dollar, #sound money."
That's right. They're figuring it out. The ruling class is getting on the Bitcoin bandwagon because they don't want to be left behind holding the bag of worms of US dollars.
Right. Somebody says they're buying Dogecoin and you can't stop me. That's the only joke coin, that still has any sort of credibility in any way as just a troll coin, right?
I completely forgot about it. I remember from 2014, but it's people have weird habits.
Somebody else was leaving messages 13 minutes behind. They started watching this 13 minutes late, and then they were leaving live comments and realizing that they must sound crazy because they're responding to stuff from a while ago. And I need to mention Cuban cigars because I failed to mention that. And, we were talking about all the things that Cuba has, and we did forget to mention Cuban cigars. You got to admit that.
Oh, yeah. No, I've had many Cuban cigars over the years. Very tasty. Very nice. Very nice.
You're admitting to these crimes of having Cuban cigars?
Yeah. Yes, there's quite a trade. You take the bands off in Cuba. You take the bands off, and you send them without the bands to the United States, and you send the bands separately. And then when they get to the U.S., you put the bands back on the cigar.
Yeah, they go via Canada.
Yeah, different ways. But once you take the band off, it's hard to identify where they're from exactly. So, that's why my shop in Santa Monica, California, Lone Wolf Cigar Shop, had a locker there for a while with my cigars and used to hang out there. I used to hang out, used to go there every day with Chris Penn, the brother of Sean Penn. He used to live right down the block and he used to come in every day and regale us with stories from the movies he was making and tales from Hollywood while we smoked cigars. And I remember the guy who owned the place, he had a cigar that, I'm not at all joking, was more than 30 inches long.
A cigar that was 30 inches long?
Yeah, I mean
That's absurd,
it's
right?
beyond the reach of your arm.
That must have looked dumb.
It does look dumb, but he would sit down there, light up this 3-foot long cigar of fine cigar, and spend all day smoking it. It's just like, wow, that's a marvel to behold. But there's some pretty amazing.
People were mentioning that we should be having ice cream. Max, we did have some keto ice cream earlier.
Yeah,
It
we
was
did. Yeah,
mango flavored.
I made keto mango ice cream and also keto vanilla cake in my Dash mini bunt maker, mini cake Dash mini cake Dash mini bunt cake maker, right? Which is a great cake maker, without a doubt. And it takes 9 minutes in the Dash mini cake bunt maker, and it comes out really good. It's
It is
very
good.
tasty. Yeah, it's very nice. Very nice.
You know what we should do when this lockdown and COVID and all this stuff is over is we should do a Tupperware sort of meetup. We should have just a big keto meetup, and Max can bake some cakes and make some
Ooh.
ice cream, and then we could sell the products. We could sell the ice cream maker and these little keto cake.
Yeah,
sort of bakers.
the Dash. They got the Dash waffle maker, the Dash bunt mini cake maker. I just got the Dash mini pie maker, but I haven't used it yet.
It must be intimidating, is it?
Well,
pies seem more intimidating to make than cakes.
I just haven't gotten around to it because you have to make the crust separately.
That's what I'm saying. It seems more intimidating.
Yeah, it's maybe. I just haven't gotten over the pie, my barrier to whatever it is. So making the Dash mini pie maker, and they have a Dash mini ice cream maker, but I think the one I have right now from Winter is better, so I'm not going to fool around with that. And they also have a Dash mini air fryer, which looks interesting, but I haven't really decided to get. I haven't thought about the air fryer yet, and I'm not really convinced I'm going to get that.
No, because it seems like we don't, with keto, you don't really, the air fryer makes like French fries.
Yeah,
it's
always making French fries, but we don't have French fries.
No, we don't have French fries.
Not really. I suppose you could do stuff with it, but I haven't motivated. It hasn't really caught my attention to get an air fryer. I got my Instapot, which I use to make keto cheesecake, which works really well, but I haven't really branched out. There's a lot more you can do with the Instapot. I haven't really done much more with it. You can do lots of stuff with it, but I haven't really done much more with it than make my keto cheesecake. And I just made a cherry keto cheesecake, which came out pretty well. I got these dried cherries, put that in there, which it was really good. So it just kind of reminded me of something from like an Italian dessert that you might pop into a cafe in Milan or something and get an espresso and like that thing, which is like a cherry cheesecake thing, which was tasty. Really liked it. Boy, thinking of Italy is nice.
I know. Like I find myself for the first time recently starting to really miss travel. Like I'm starting to notice that we haven't been anywhere. Like I really long to go to Paris. Like we just watched The Queen's Gambit, and she's in Paris, and I'm like, oh, like I saw the image, the skyline of Paris. I'm like, oh my god, why aren't we there? This is not right. And the fact that we usually go to Montauk in the summer and we didn't go there this year. And
right.
I when we started to talk about food right now, my stomach started to growl thinking of the lobster rolls we have out there. And then, why haven't we done that? And then just missing all our Bitcoin friends at these conferences. Would you be interested in a keto cooking conference with me and Max? I think that would be like next level bizarre. It would be like total punk rock in a way that it would be so unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Pretty bizarre. Yeah.
But, I would really like to travel. We got to go right before the lockdowns. Like Max and I were on like riding. You know, when you see those psychopaths in Portugal riding those like 95-foot waves,
Oh yeah.
like that was us traveling in the 2 months before COVID, as it was unraveling and unrolling in China. Like we could see those headlines. For some reason, no American could see those headlines, right?
All right.
They weren't paying attention, but we were paying attention, and we were like, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, then Colombia, and then back to America, and then to Cancun, and then Mexico City, and then Austin, and then back to North Carolina, and then Vegas, and then Los Angeles. And like the whole time, like we saw, it was like this big boulder, was like the boulder rolling down the hill towards us was getting bigger and bigger. And we were like, we're going to have to stop flying soon, I have a feeling. And sure enough, we got back, and like a week later, maybe 10 days later, there was lockdowns brought in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it would be nice. I'm thinking about Portugal again. That's a great place in Europe to be. They got the golden visa program.
They're about to end it. The news headlines, in the Telegraph and the Guardian are saying that it's like a few weeks left, because so many Chinese took advantage of it that they, like there were like thousands of them that just applying for it, and so they, I guess the EU Commission and stuff like forced them to shut it down.
Oh wow, okay. Well, I guess that's that.
But we still like Portugal.
Yeah, it's a nice place for sure. Very nice. Love it there.
Okay, well, I'll look at the comments one more time. And if you have anything interesting to say it now. Otherwise, we're going to go and, head up and do our other stuff that we have to do. Cannabis, no. But dinner party with Michael Pinto? I don't know what is it. Oh, yeah. In our Michael Pinto interview, you said we would have a dinner party and he would cook for us.
Yeah. I'd like to have that for sure.
Big Smith. Yeah. The Jersey Italians that's where all the New York Italian food comes from.
Yeah, like Tony Soprano.
Yeah. It's Joyzy.
Yeah.
The skyline of Paris is my front window. Nice for you, Rico.
Yeah, Rico.
And yeah, so again, that's it for this episode of Microdosing Stacy's hair. I hope you like to microdose my hair, and make sure to join our Telegram group, t.me /orange pill, and follow us on facebook.com/orange pill podcast, and start having a conversation with everybody. Just don't be a Karen, don't be a shitcoiner, and don't be boring. Those are the only rules.
That's it. The 3 rules, and you're in. That's it. That's the way to be. Awesome.
See you guys.
Bye.
Finish and stream. Right. Why do they always ask like double? They're like, are you really sure? You really